The Renacida story has reached its end, and with it we got to meet one of the more unique characters to come to the game so far, being Galbrena. I wasn't originally planning to pull for Galbrena, since even though I did like her design, I didn't feel like I needed another fusion DPS as I already had Chun-Li, Brant, Looper, and Chisha built. However, Galbrena's trial was enough for me to completely change my mind, as she plays unlike any other character in the game currently, and she has some design elements that remind me of Devil May Cry. So I decided to pick her up, which turned out to be a great decision, as she can be a lot of fun to play around with. So in this video, I want to go over a kit, her weapon and sequences, how you can build her, the different teams you can use, talk about her rotation, and finally give my thoughts on her, including the things that I liked and disliked, as well as whether I would recommend pulling for her or not. Now, throughout this video, there'll likely be a lot of boring parts, so to save those who already know most of what I'm going to talk about, I'll be sure to put timestamps in the description. So let's get started with her kit. Her basic attack chain is a 4-part short-ranged pistol combo. This can be seen as more of a melee combo, as stages 1, 2, and 3 will advance towards the target and are considered as heavy attack damage, whereas her stage 4 will do a short-range shot that is considered as echo skill damage. Her basic attack 3 is a medium-ranged AoE attack, and her basic attack 4 will chain back into her basic attack 2. Her dodge counter is a stronger version of her basic attack 3 that will chain into her basic attack 4. This attack is considered as heavy attack damage. Her heavy attack chain is a 3-part medium range shotgun combo. Stage 1 of this combo will have her move towards the target, while stage 2 and 3 will have her move backwards, with stage 3 also having a short-ranged pulling effect around the target's location. Stages 1 and 2 are considered as heavy attack damage, whereas stage 3 is considered as echo skill damage. And as these are heavy attacks, each stage of this combo will consume a small amount of stamina. Her heavy attack chain will continue to repeat if the button is held. However, if you use a normal attack after stage 1, this will chain into her basic attack 2, and if you use a normal attack after her stage 2 or 3, this will chain into her basic attack 3. Her plunge attack will have her do a small reposition towards the current target before doing a slam attack towards the ground, hitting enemies in a short-ranged AoE. This can be chained into her basic attack 3 after landing. However, if you hold down the attack button while mid-air, rather than immediately triggering a plunge attack, this will instead do a pistol barrage attack towards the ground, spraying any enemies in range with bullets. This consumes stamina over time and will end with her regular plunge attack when either the attack button is released or she runs out of stamina. Now, there's a couple of things I want to point out with her plunge abilities. The actual plunge attack animation has her moving forward slightly instead of directly downwards, so this can cause her to land behind some targets if you're close enough. Both her plunge and pistol barrage attacks have a short reposition before the attack. However, the reposition for both is different and can be used together to move a greater distance. Both of these attacks are considered as heavy attack damage. And lastly, enemies staggered by the bullet barrage will tend to be drawn towards the center. So this can be somewhat used as a grouping ability. However, it won't work on larger targets and it's not exactly reliable. Her resonance skill will launch her into the air, doing a long-range gap closer towards the current target. If this doesn't make contact with an enemy, nothing else will happen. If this does hit an enemy, this will do damage on impact before she does a close-range shotgun shot while jumping away. This skill is considered as heavy attack damage, has a cooldown of 5 seconds, and will also leave her mid-air. So next, let's talk about her forte. She has 3 different bars around her forte gauge. However, I want to get through all of her attacks first before we talk about buffs. So we're going to focus on the right forte gauge first, then we'll talk about the left forte gauge after we've gone through that, and finally we'll talk about the bottom forte gauge once we've talked about all of her attacks. The top right forte gauge represents her Sinflame. Now, we haven't talked about this yet, but Galbrena has 2 different states she can be in. Her default state is called Threshold State, which I'm just going to refer to as her normal state. While in her normal state, her normal attacks, resonance skill, and her intro skill will all generate Sinflame when they hit an enemy. I'm going to refer to these group of abilities as her forte generators. Once her Sinflame has filled the gauge, her resonance skill will change to an enhanced skill called Ascent of Malice. This ability will do a medium range gap closing attack, consuming all of her Sinflame and converting it into Purging Flame. This changes Galbrena from her normal state into Demon Hypostasis, which I'm going to refer to as her enhanced state. Ascent of Malice will chain into her enhanced basic attack 2, is considered as heavy attack damage, and has a cooldown of 13 seconds. While in her enhanced state, her top forte gauge will change to just showing 1 bar. This will show the amount of purging flame she has. Also, all of her forte generators will no longer generate forte. However, her normal attacks as well as her resonance skill will now consume purging flame and do more damage. Now, technically all of her normal attacks and regular resonance skills do get replaced with new abilities in her enhanced state. However, for the most part, they're exactly the same, just with better scaling, so instead we'll focus on what's changed. Her enhanced basic attack chain will change from a 4-part combo to a 5-part combo, where she'll do some very flashy kick and wing attacks. The notable differences between her regular basic combo and the enhanced version are Stage 3 will change to a medium-ranged AoE attack around Galbrena, Stage 4 becomes a gap-closing wing attack, and finally her Stage 5 will do a kick attack that does extra damage against dudes.
He keeps kicking me in the dick.
Aw, he's all tuckered out.
Stages 1, 2, and 3 are considered as heavy attack damage, and stages 4 and 5 are considered as echo skill damage, while also freezing the enemies they hit for a short period of time. The stage 5 of this combo will chain into her enhanced basic attack 3. Her enhanced dodge counter is a harder hitting version of her enhanced basic attack 3, making it very strong against multiple enemies, and will chain into her enhanced basic attack 4. This is also considered as heavy attack damage. These are the only attacks that will change during her enhanced state, and everything else will function basically identically to the way it did before. Her enhanced state will last for either 50 seconds or until she runs out of purging flame, after which she'll return to her normal state. So that's basically her right forte gauge. Her left forte gauge represents the amount of Afterflame she has, which can be gained by using echo skills in the team. Each echo skill used will generate 8 points of Afterflame for Galbrena, with the gauge having a maximum of 40 points, which is equivalent to using 5 echo skills. All Afterflame will be consumed when Galbrena uses her enhanced skill, Ascent of Malice, and each point consumed will increase the damage of her enhanced state's abilities by 1.5%, with a maximum cap of 60%. This buff will last until her enhanced state ends. Now, a couple of things I want to make sure to mention here. This damage increase will only affect her enhanced normal attacks and resonance skill. Other abilities like her liberation, her intro skill, and her outro skills are not affected by this increase. The Afterflame gauge can also be seen under her health bar when Galbrena is not on the field. She can only get Afterflame for each different type of echo skill once per usage of her enhanced skill, so having multiple types of echo skills in your team will generate more Afterflame for her. And lastly, she can only gain Afterflame during her normal state. So using an echo skill during her enhanced state won't increase the damage of your current enhanced state's abilities, and it also won't generate any Afterflame for her next rotation. So that's her left forte gauge out of the road. However, before we get into her last forte bar, I want to go over the remaining attacks in her kit. Her liberation ability will cause an eruption in front of her, doing a medium-ranged AoE attack. This skill will do a large amount of damage over time and will freeze enemies it hits for the duration of the ability. This will also increase the damage multiplier of her enhanced state's normal attacks by 85% for 14 seconds, and depending on the state that she's in when this is used, this will chain into her basic attack 2 or her enhanced basic attack 2. Her liberation is considered as echo skill damage, has a cooldown of 25 seconds, and can also be cast mid-air. Her intro skill will do a point-blank shotgun shot against the target. This can chain into her basic attack stage 2 by pressing attack, or her heavy attack stage 2 by holding down attack. If she's in her enhanced state, this will do the enhanced version of each. Her outro skill will do a large amount of damage to the target in a medium-ranged AoE. And the last attack I want to touch on is Galbrena's special dodge ability called Hellstride. Hellstride can be performed by using a dodge either during or after any ground ability, including her liberation, her intro skill, and even landing from a plunge attack. This will have her do a medium-range dash attack either towards the target or in the current direction of movement. This dash attack can phase through most enemies, and any enemies hit by this ability will take 666 fixed damage that is considered to be basic attack damage. Using this ability after any ground attack does not interrupt that ability's combo from continuing. For an example, using Hellstride after her basic attack 2 will have her follow up with her basic attack 3 instead of resetting the combo back to 1. Now, a couple of things to mention here. This ability can cause a crit, however the damage from the attack is fixed and will always do 666 damage no matter what. Also, this is considered as basic attack damage, unlike most of Galbrena's heavy and echo scaling abilities, so this will not proc any special effects that require either of those to trigger. However, it is still useful for some buffs, which we'll talk about later. Hellstride also can't be used immediately after Hellstride, so it will require another ground ability to be used before it can be used again. It can also phase through most enemies, which in some cases can help with positioning. And lastly, Hellstride is considered to be a dodge ability, so it will give you iframes and won't stop you from performing a perfect dodge. That's all of her attacks out of the way, so let's move on to her bottom forte gauge. This gauge is basically a timer for the Burning Drive buff. While active, this will increase Galbrena's resistance to interruption, as well as give a 20% attack buff for 4 seconds. This buff can be triggered by casting her intro skill, using her Enhanced State's basic attack 4, using any of her resonance skills, and lastly when she uses Hellstride. Her first inherent skill will apply a stacking debuff against targets whenever they're hit by most of Galbrena's attacks. This debuff has a maximum of 4 stacks, with the stack lasting 5.5 seconds. However, each different type of attack can apply 1 stack every 5 seconds. Just to try and make this easier to understand, I'll go through all of the attacks that are considered to be different from one another. Her basic attack chain is 1, with her dodge counter being considered different from the basic attack chain. Her heavy attack chain is another. Her plunge attack and bullet barrage are considered to be the same type of attack. Her resonance skill, her liberation ability, her intro skill, the Hellstride dodge ability, and lastly, all of the enhanced versions of her abilities are considered to be different from their regular versions as well. The only one of her abilities that won't apply a stack at all is her outro skill. Each stack of this debuff that an enemy has will amplify damage the target takes from Galbrena's attacks by 5%, with a maximum of 20% at 4 stacks. Each stack is represented by a letter. C is 1 stack, B is 2, A is 3, and S is the maximum number of 4 stacks. Now, something else to mention here. This will increase the damage the target takes from Galbrena's abilities, however it won't increase the damage it takes from her own echo skill, nor will it increase the damage the target takes from her teammates. Her second inherent skill will cause her regular basic attack 4, her enhanced basic attack 5, as well as her heavy attack 3 to recover 10 points of stamina when used. These attacks don't need to hit an enemy in order to regenerate stam. That's her kit. So let's move on to her sequences and her signature weapon. Her S1 will give her Enhanced States abilities an extra 2% crit damage for each point of Afterflame consumed, with a maximum cap of 80% crit damage. This will also make Galbrena immune to interruption while casting her Enhanced Basic Attack 5, Enhanced Heavy Attack 3, and her Enhanced Mid-Air attacks, including the Bullet Barrage. Her S2 will increase the attack bonus granted by the Burning Drive buff by 350%. Now, this does look like a really strong sequence on paper, however I'm gonna talk more about this later. Her S3 increases the multiplier of her Liberation ability by 130%. Her S4 will grant all Resonators in the team 20% damage bonus to all attributes for 20 seconds whenever anyone in the team uses an Echo skill. Her S5 increases the damage multiplier for all of her Resonance skill abilities by 150%. And last, her S6 will change her enhanced state from Demon Hypostasis to Eternal Hypostasis. This will multiply the damage of her enhanced normal attacks by an additional 60%, as well as give her enhanced abilities an extra 0.875 fusion damage amplification for each point of Afterflame consumed. This has a cap of 35% and is removed upon returning to her normal state. Now let's talk about her weapon. Her signature weapon gives a good amount of base attack and crit damage from its main stats, as well as 12 to 24% extra attack from the passive. It also gives 24 to 48% heavy damage amplification for 6 seconds when dealing echo skill damage, and 24 to 48% echo damage amplification for 6 seconds when dealing heavy attack damage. When both of these buffs are active at the same time, damage will also ignore 8 to 16% of the target's defense. So should you pull for her weapon or her sequences? This is going to get a bit more complicated than my normal recommendation, as there's a lot of things you might want to consider when deciding what to pull for. Her weapon is of course her best in slot, and you will see higher damage output when compared to her S1. However, it's also an incredibly niche weapon that's unlikely to be very useful on anyone else but Galbrena, other than as a stat stick. Her current second best option is the Last Dance. This weapon will do just fine on Galbrena, however the damage output when compared to her signature is noticeably lower. And her third best option, Static Mist, which is the standard banner weapon, is unfortunately a bit worse again. However, it will still get the job done. Now, when I did my testing, my Static Mist build wasn't as good as my main build, but she was still able to dish out a pretty good amount of damage with it. So her signature is probably the best option to pick up if you want to get the most out of her for the least amount of resources, even when compared to her S1. However, if you compare the signature weapon's value against her S2, it's really hard for me to know if this sequence is crazy strong or just incredibly average. Going by how the Wuthering Tools calculator is doing its calculation, rather than giving an extra 350% attack on top of Burning Drive's 20% attack buff, which would be 370% extra attack, it is instead only a 350% increase to the 20% attack buff. This means the actual increase is the initial 20% plus 20% times 3.5, which is only an extra 70% attack or 90% total. The reason I'm pointing this out is this is by no means a small amount, but it can be incredibly deceptive at face value, and I'm sure there's going to be people who get caught up by seeing a big number, instead of if Kuro just told the player that it gives an extra 70% attack. Now, because I can't test this myself, I can't confirm which scenario is correct. However, I'm going to lean towards it only being an increase of 70%, as an increase of 350% for an S2 would be insanely strong. So here's my recommendation. Main DPS characters don't tend to bring a lot of value outside of their damage output, so you should try to invest into their damage a little bit, and free-to-play players should try to get it to S0R1 if they can. However, if you care more about collecting characters rather than DPS, S0 with Static Mist will do fine for most things in the game. However, if you're gonna go down this road, you should try to make Static Mist your minimum investment. If you already have the Last Dance, it's honestly a really great weapon choice for her, so I would say you can skip her signature weapon in favor of saving for the next character, as long as you're okay with sharing the weapon with Carlotta. Now, for light spenders, her S1 through to her S3 are all pretty decent damage increases on their own. Her S4 would also be a good increase for her team's damage. However, if you don't plan to run her with other DPS characters that can benefit from the increase, S3R1 is a good stopping point. Lastly, for Whales, her S6 is a substantial increase to her damage output during her enhanced state. However, unless you plan to go all the way to S6 from S3, you could just stay at S3 as well, as her S4 isn't really that great, and her S5 is really weak, as it only increases the damage of her resonance skills. Not to mention that depending on your rotation, you might try to cancel her skill anyway, making S5 something you'll see a lot less benefit from. So now let's quickly talk about her different builds before we talk about her teams. Galbrena's main echo set she wants to be on is the new 3-piece set Flamewing's Shadow, which can drop from a nightmare nest in the new Septimont region. This can be farmed once per day for free, so be sure to farm this each reset if you're trying to build her. This set works very similar to her weapon, giving heavy attack damage an extra 20% crit rate for 6 seconds after dealing echo skill damage, and echo skill damage an extra 20% crit rate for 6 seconds after dealing heavy attack damage. When both of these buffs are active, you will also get an additional 16% fusion damage bonus. Her best in slot echo on this set is the Kurosaurus, as it gives 12% fusion damage bonus as well as 20% echo skill damage bonus for just having it equipped in the main slot. It's also a summon echo, which makes it a lot easier to use during Galbrena's rotation. However, this echo is rather hard to farm as there aren't that many spawns around the world currently, and other than the nightmare nest that we just talked about, which doesn't even drop this echo, there isn't a tacet field you can farm that drops Flamewing's Shadow echoes. But as Flamewing's Shadow is only a 3-piece set, that means we can fill the last 2 slots with echoes from another set. So in order to give yourself the best chance of getting a Korosaurus, the best set to fill these 2 slots is the 5-piece Flaming Clawprint, as the 2-piece bonus for this set will give 10% fusion damage bonus. The Korosaurus is one of the 3-cost echoes on this set, and it's farmable at a tacet field in the Septimont region. This echo combination is her best in slot, however some other options are the Molten Rift set, which is just as good as Flaming Clawprint, and Lingering Tunes is another option for the 2-piece bonus, however its 10% attack increase isn't as good as fusion damage bonus. She can also work on 5-piece Molten Rift with the Nightmare Inferno Rider echo, or 5-piece Flaming Clawprint with the Lioness of Glory echo as a temporary set. Molten Rift will give her much better personal damage output, while Flaming Clawprint will give her better team DPS if paired with other fusion characters. However, the 15% bonus from Flaming Clawprint doesn't stack if another character like Looper is already running this set, and neither of these sets can get close to outperforming Flamewing's Shadow, as the 20% crit rate alone increases her DPS by a lot, while also making her more consistent. The best build for her for these sets is 4-3-3-1-1, running either crit rate or damage on the 4 cost depending on whichever you need more of, fusion damage bonus on both of your 3 costs, and attack percent on both of your 1 costs. Your substat priority should be crit rate and damage, then attack percent and energy regen, aiming for about 115% ER, and lastly heavy attack bonus and flat attack. Heavy attack is technically better, especially if you have her S2. However, they both don't really matter that much when compared to the other stats, so prioritize trying to get the other stats first and treat heavy attack bonus and flat attack as bonuses. Also, you don't necessarily need any energy regen on her, as certain teams can rotate or quick swap in a way that gives her enough energy each rotation. However, this can make her more inconsistent, especially against enemies that move around a lot, and it also won't help if you plan to use her in multiple different team comps, as different teams will have different energy breakpoints. But if you're running Static Mist, you already have a good amount of ER on her, and can even rank up the weapon to get more. So focus on getting damage substats unless you want to future-proof her for when you eventually get a better weapon. Now, I would highly recommend if you're trying to min-max Galbrena's echoes, or even if you're just trying to get a decent build on the Flamewing Shadows set, build a Korosaurus first, and then build the rest of your echoes to accommodate it. The Korosaurus will likely be the hardest echo for you to obtain, at least if you're hunting for a decent one, so you want to try and keep your options open to accommodate it no matter what set it's on. So focus on getting it sorted first, and then build your other echoes around it. So now let's talk about her teams and her rotation. Galbrena, being a fusion, heavy attack, and echo damage scaling unit, actually gives her a lot more team options than most other characters in the game. As a selfish main DPS character, she works well with some kind of sub DPS buffer to support her. Some good examples are heavy attack amplifiers like Mortifi, Yuno, and Falova, or fusion damage amplifiers like Chung-Li, Brant, and Looper. She'll also work well with echo damage amplifiers, however we don't currently have any in the game as of right now. Most sub DPS buffers will work well on the Moonlit Cloud set with Heron as their echo to provide the most damage increase to Galbrena as possible. However, more DPS focused sets can work too if your sub DPS performs well on their own. For her second slot, a healer or team support is the best choice, with some good examples being Looper, Shorekeeper, Verena, Brant, and even Cantarella can work pretty well thanks to her abilities that count as different echo skills, which will help Galbrena fill her Afterflame gauge to full. Most of these characters will have their own best in slot sets, however some of them will work well on the Rejuvenating Glow set with Fallacy or Bell as their echo. Fallacy is good for a reliable team attack increase, whereas Bell is good for damage reduction and technically better team damage. However, the Bell buff will run out sooner and also only last for 3 hits, so I would recommend Fallacy over Bell. With all of these different team options, this actually makes her pretty flexible with what teams she can fit into, allowing her to still work with other characters if your stronger supports are needed on the other team. However, her best in slot team is the Mono Fusion team, consisting of Galbrena, Brant, and Looper. In this team, Galbrena will be the selfish main DPS character, Brant can be the sub DPS, amplifier, buffer, healer, and shielder character. Basically, he's the team's Chad. He can be run on the Moonlit Cloud set with Heron to buff Galbrena's damage, the Rejuvenating Glow set with Fallacy or Bell to buff the team's damage, and you can also run him on Molten Rift with Inferno Rider, or if you have his signature weapon, you can run him on Tidebreaker's Courage with the Dragon of Dirge Echo, which will make him just an amplifier for Galbrena, but with better personal damage output. Just for reference, I personally run him on Tidebreaker's Courage. Looper is the sub DPS, amplifier, team buffer, and fusion resistance shredder. In this scenario, she really only has one set you should run her on, which is the Flaming Clawprint set with the Lioness of Glory as her echo. This will give her pretty decent personal damage output, however it's mostly to increase the damage of her teammates. This is what I consider to be her best in slot team for a few reasons. It has really good and somewhat reliable damage output, especially when you consider it's not using Shorekeeper, and it also does a great job at both single target and AoE DPS, making it a strong team in both Tower of Adversity as well as Whimpering Wastes. A few other good teams to mention though are Mortiphy and Looper, however this lacks any kind of sustain, so it's really only useful if you're confident with dodging. Yuno and Looper, Looper and Shorekeeper, Mortiphy and Shorekeeper, Yuno and Shorekeeper, and if you're a newer player, Mortiphy and Verena. Now, Farlova and Cantarella can apparently work as well, however I don't own either of these units, so I can't test it for myself. There's also other team options where she can be paired with Brant or Chung-Li, so feel free to experiment with the characters you have. But now let's talk about how you can do her rotation. When you start a fight, you want to try and build her Sinflame gauge up to about 70%. Now, you can do this before you start to rotate through your characters, or you can do this through quick swapping. Once you have enough Sinflame, you want to go through Looper's rotation to buff your team and outro to Brant. Then do Brant's rotation for some good burst damage before using his anchor and outroing to Galbrena. Galbrena's intro skill will trigger the Burning Drive buff, generate some Sinflame, and apply one stack of Fated End. You can then follow this with a basic attack stage 2 to apply the second stack, then use a heavy attack stage 1 for the third stack, followed by Hellstride for the final stack, and resetting the Burning Drive buff. At this point, you should hopefully have enough Forte to use her enhanced skill, however if not, just continue to attack until the gauge is full. Once the skill is available, use your Liberation, and immediately after, use your enhanced skill to enter your enhanced state. The reason we do this rotation is to get the most amount of damage out of our Liberation, we want to build her Fated End stacks to max before we use it. While your Liberation ability will apply one stack of Fated End to the enemy, the first tick of damage from your Liberation will only get the effect of 3 stacks. So we can try to maximize our damage output by building our stacks to max before we use it. And the reason we use our Liberation before we use our enhanced skill is her enhanced skill will generate a fair bit of energy for her, which can only be fully taken advantage of if you use it after using your Liberation. However, if energy isn't a major concern, you can speed up this rotation by using your enhanced skill for the final Fated End stack instead of using Hellstride before cancelling the animation with your Liberation. Now, this version has a few benefits over the previous. You can take better advantage of the freeze provided by her Liberation, making it easier to land your abilities and less likely to get hit out of them. Her enhanced skill also resets the Burning Drive buff, making sure you have it active for your Liberation's damage no matter what ability combination you use, and you don't have to use as many abilities before you can start doing her main damage, as it isn't important which abilities you use or what order you use them in. The point is to get to 4 stacks as quickly as possible. Now, you should also try to use your Echo skill at some point during this setup, and the best time to use it is either during the intro skills animation or just after you use your very first heavy attack. This will give her the heavy attack buffs from her set and weapon, and as your first attack after your intro skill is almost guaranteed to be a heavy attack, you'll immediately activate the full echo set and weapon buffs as well. Now, having said this, you can technically use her echo skill at any point in her rotation, just as long as you don't use it during her enhanced state, as this will be completely useless to her. Once in her enhanced state, her best damage combo is her basic attack 2 through 5, then 3 through 5. This is the simple rotation for her that will consume all of her forte fairly quickly and do a good amount of damage. However, even though this doesn't need to play a big role in her rotation, if you want to, you can utilize Hellstride cancels to force certain attacks during her rotation. This isn't really too important when she's paired with a fusion damage amplifier like Brant, but when she's paired with a heavy attack amplifier like Mortify, your basic attack 3 is your hardest hitting attack in the basic combo, so to get the most out of your amplification and your forte, you could try dash cancelling your basic attacks 2, 4, and 5 wherever you can. I did a few different tests to see what combination of attacks would give the most amount of damage, and the best single target damage output utilizing Hellstride cancels as well as Mortify's heavy attack amplification was using her basic attack 3 and 4 repeatedly. Now, even though basic attack 5 hits harder, it costs way more forte to use and ends up being a lot less damage output. And the best multi-target combination was using basic attack 3 repeatedly. However, there's a couple of things to mention with this version. If you're using the Flame Wings Shadow set or her signature weapon, you need to periodically do some kind of echo skill damage to reset their buff durations. So even though the theoretical maximum number of basic attack 3s you can use per full forte bar is 6, the practical number is actually 5 if you want to do the most DPS. So for this reason, I personally still prefer the basic attack 3 and 4 rotation for multi-target, as this will work nearly as well in all scenarios and you don't need to try as hard to get it to work. However, all of these combos will also work a lot better if you're able to utilize dodge counters where you can, as her dodge counter is just a much harder hitting version of her basic attack 3. But once you run out of forte at the end of whatever combo you decide to use, focus on generating 70% of her forte again to use for her next rotation and then repeat the process. Now, these rotations might not be the best way to do damage with Galbrena, and a good quick swap rotation will have higher DPS. However, this is a simple and easy to learn rotation, so I hope it helps you regardless. So what are my thoughts on Galbrena? She's one of the most unique characters in the game as of right now, and I quite like the fact that she feels inspired by Devil May Cry with a little bit of Bayonetta to spice her up. At a base level, she's probably one of the easiest characters to just pick up and start playing, but she also allows for a bit of skill expression, making her really interesting to experiment with. Some of the things I liked about her were her regular skill is an incredibly good gap closer, which can also parry attacks. This can also be said for her mid-air bullet barrage, especially when it's paired with her skill, as you can basically teleport to an enemy's position even if they're in the air and completely avoid their attack. She neither felt too weak or overpowered in both team and solo play. Now, my Galbrena is still only level 80 with level 6 and 7 talents. However, she always felt like she was doing the appropriate amount of damage in most scenarios. Another thing I really liked about her is she has a mechanic that will see her benefit from her team, being the Afterflame that's generated from echo skills. However, unlike a character like Zani, this part of her kit was done in a way that she doesn't need other characters' echo skills in order to function correctly. Her liberation always felt really good, and I never struggled to get it off no matter what rotation I used, and her Hellstride ability would come in handy when trying to do different combos. One of the things that really surprised me when I started playing around with her, since her Hellstride ability dealt damage, it's actually able to parry attacks. Now, the timing on this can be a bit tight, at least when you compare it to other attacks that can parry, and because of the way certain enemy attacks work in the game, it doesn't always parry when you would expect it to. However, for the most part, it was a really strong parry ability. It's also great at repositioning, can be used when exploring the world to quickly dash around, and allows her to pull off some moves that other characters can't or really struggle with. Having said that, Hellstride did cause me a lot of frustrations as well, mostly because I like to dodge attacks in the game and utilize dodge counters, but as a dodge ability, Hellstride is actually pretty shit. Wuthering Waves already has a lot of attacks in the game that can require certain positioning if you're trying to dodge them, and Galbrena can make this feel a lot worse, as if you need to dodge in a direction to stay in the hitbox of an attack to dodge it, she will often dodge too far and have the attack miss. The reason this is a problem is there are a lot of attacks in the game that have lingering damage, and if you miss a perfect dodge for an attack and then go to re-engage with the enemy, the lingering damage from that attack can hit you after the fact. Her Hellstride ability was also incredibly hit and miss when it came to successfully dodging attacks. I've never had more issues triggering perfect dodges with any other character, and I found myself phasing through attacks that I should have dodged. The only thing that I found to fix this issue was to dodge attacks at the very last second so that she hadn't moved from her original position when she needed to dodge them. However, this would also cause a whole other list of issues that we aren't going to get into in this video. Long story short, Hellstride caused a lot of problems when it came to dodging. Other issues I found were her dodge counters were really bad when it came to allowing damage to hit her during the transition from perfect dodge to dodge counter. This is a general problem with the game's current combat that affects other characters as well, but Galbrena felt like this would happen a lot more often than most. Her Enhanced State's basic attack 3 and dodge counters weren't really that great when it came to their damage actually hitting the target, as just moving back slightly too far would cause the attack to miss. The freeze on her Enhanced State's basic attack 4 and 5 would often get me into more trouble than it helped. I've had this problem in the past with other characters like Fleur-de-Lis while trying to dodge attacks, and this is absolutely a skill issue, as I'll often just try my luck with an attack to see if I can fit them in, but unfortunately my reaction time isn't so good that I can watch to see if the time freeze lands just before an attack, and dodge at the very last second if it doesn't. So this is absolutely a me problem. However, it's still frustrating nonetheless, as she would have been a lot easier to use if the freeze was tied to the attack's animation and would get cancelled if you dodged out of it. Now, having said that, I would never ask for this to get changed, as there's likely players a lot more skilled than myself who can make some pretty stylish attack combos utilizing the freeze. However, as this will likely catch the average player off guard and potentially cause them to dodge lock themselves in a panic, it's still worth bringing up. Speaking of dodge locking though, it was surprisingly easy for her to dodge lock herself, mostly due to what we talked about before, with her Hellstride dodge often causing attacks to miss. This would make any following attacks come in faster than you might be prepared for, but they would often miss as well, which if you tried to dodge them, would leave her completely vulnerable to the rest of the boss's combo. In the cases where this was a real problem, I would often just completely stop dealing damage just so that I could perform a regular dodge ability. Galbrena's Hellstride ability window is directly tied to the animation of whatever attack came before it. So some of her attacks will allow you to just stand there for an extended period of time, and as long as you don't move or her animation returns to her idle state, Hellstride will remain available for you to use. However, the period of time Hellstride gives you to continue your combo after using it is incredibly short, and an issue that I ran into is if some kind of time slow occurred during Hellstride from either a parry or from the enemy being immobilized, it wouldn't continue her combo and would instead reset it back to stage 1. Now, I could be wrong on what causes this, but I ran into this problem a lot when fighting Tempest, and it was super annoying. Another thing that I experienced was almost all of her buff and debuff windows are really short, which for the most part isn't that hard to deal with. However, if an enemy distances themselves from you for a short period of time, or if you get locked into some kind of attack animation, all it takes is something like this happening at the wrong time, and all of her buffs and debuffs can fall off. The worst offender for this was her stacking debuff falling off, so it can be a good idea to keep an eye on it throughout a fight. Somewhat on that note, her Liberation's multiplier increase that it gives to her Enhanced States abilities also only lasts for 14 seconds, which isn't short, but if you use it before something like Mephis' Vanish, Sentry's Flight Mode, Hecate's Parry combo, Heron's Fire Breath, and any of the other examples in the game, this buff might fall off before you can take full advantage of it. This is another good reason to use this ability just before or after you enter her Enhanced State, as if you use it too far in advance while you're still building Forte and then an attack like this happens, you can potentially waste the entire buff window and get nothing out of it. However, it would have been nice if the multiplier's buff duration would only start once you entered into your Enhanced State, making sure you always always got the full 14 seconds from it, or if it didn't have a duration at all but would expire when she returns to her normal state. Her abilities are also really flashy, which can make some enemy attacks pretty hard to focus on. However, something that made this worse was her enhanced basic 3 would also make the camera snap behind her. Now, most of the time this was fine and didn't take away any visibility. However, there were a couple of examples where it would either completely disorient you, making you lose track of what's going on, or in some rare instances, it would completely lose track of what you were targeting because the camera wouldn't try to keep your target on screen at all. This is something that's becoming pretty common with the newer characters, and I'm really not a fan of it. Lastly, using her echo can either be helpful towards her DPS or completely useless depending on the time it's used. Now, this is definitely more of a solo problem than a general issue, as like we talked about earlier, the best time to use her echo skill is at the very start of her rotation. But for solo players, the cooldown for the Korosaurus is just a little bit too long to take advantage of it for every enhanced state, but it will likely come off cooldown not long after entering it. However, the problem I have with this is you can't use her echo skill during her enhanced state, as it won't generate any Afterflame for her next rotation until she exits her enhanced state. It would have been nice if you could preload Afterflame for her next rotation during her enhanced state, which would have allowed her to use her echo skill with a lot more flexibility, as well as get the damage increase from Afterflame more often. Now, having said all that, even though she does have a lot of things I would have liked to see either improved or done in a better way, in my opinion, she might not be the best, but she's one of the best character designs we've seen come to Wuthering Waves so far. She also may not be the strongest character, but her team flexibility, the uniqueness of her kit, her ability to pull off some stylish gameplay, and the fact that she can rely on her team to make her stronger, but also doesn't need them in order to do her job, makes her really stand out as one of the better characters you could get for your account. So, would I recommend people to pull for her? I would recommend to pull her without hesitation if it wasn't for 2 reasons. The other banner character she's currently running next to is Looper, and Looper is one of the best fusion supports in the game currently. So if you don't have her, she will likely be a better investment in the long run. The second reason is if you already have Chun-Li. Based on my testing, while considering Galbrena isn't maxed out yet, and she has 2 echoes that I'm still trying to replace, Chun-Li and Galbrena fill very similar roles, with Galbrena being the stronger DPS when maxed out. However, she also isn't so much stronger that Chun-Li can't keep up with her. So if you're okay with using a slightly outdated unit, skipping her to save on resources and get more out of your Chun-Li might be the better bet. Kuro also revealed Chiss's drip marketing not that long ago, who's been a highly anticipated character. So if you really want that character, it might be a good idea to start saving for her now. However, if you're a newer light spender who doesn't have any of those characters and you don't have a strong team yet, this is a really good time to pull on both of the current characters' banners. If you can get 1 copy of Galbrena, Looper, and Mortifee, who is also on the current banner, this is the beginning of a really strong team that should give you a solid start in the game. Now, having said all that, I would still have a really hard time talking anyone out of pulling for Galbrena, as personally I really like this character a lot, and even though she does make me want to pull my hair out on the odd occasion, this is the type of character design I would love to see more of in future. So if you can get Galbrena, I would definitely recommend pulling for her if you like good characters. But that will do it for the video. So I'd like to thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video or you got something useful out of it, feel free to leave a like or a comment. And if you'd like to see more content in future, you can subscribe to the channel. One last thing I want to mention before we wrap things up, the vast majority of information in these videos is based on my experience with a character, and I don't claim to know everything. So be sure to go and watch other people's videos as well, or experiment with it yourself if you really want to learn all there is to know about her. But that will do it from me. So I hope to see you in the next video, and I'll catch yous later.